This is the World Organic News for the week ending 6th of November 2017. John Moore reporting. I'll begin this week with a big thank you to Sally for requesting a copy of the Square Metre Garden PDF. And if you would like a copy of the One Square Metre Garden handout, it is still available. Email me at square@worldorganicnews.com. It'll be in your inbox pronto. There's a link in the show notes. Now to the substance of this week's episode. From the blog The Irresistible Fleet of Bicycles comes the post, Monsanto sues Arkansas over dicamba ban. Quote, in the most recent development in the dicamba scandal, Monsanto has filed a lawsuit in Arkansas's Pulaski County Circuit Court, suing state regulators for blocking dicamba for the 2018 growing season. The herbicide is controversial to say the least, increasing yields in resistant crops but simultaneously killing all other life in the region through drift, which subsequently causes serious conflict between neighbours. Monsanto's argument basically claims that the state's ban is depriving Arkansas farmers. However, many farmers are compelled to use the weed killer only in a bid to keep up with their neighbours. It's a race to the toxic bottom. End quote. And this is the problem with a near monopoly status and a nasty industrial technology. It also highlights the power of one centralised and well-funded company against a plethora of individual farmers. Join in or suffer the economic consequences. I might also add, join in and suffer the ecological consequences. Yet there is more going on over at Monsanto than at first meets the eye. Obviously, the ecological ubiquity of glyphosate is now a thing, as we discussed last week. The importance of which we reported back in March had California legislators looking to list the chemical as a carcinogenic substance. The growing resistance to this one chemical misses the point to some extent. Monsanto sells many, and the dicamba controversy in Arkansas is but another piece of the puzzle. Yahoo News ran a piece entitled, Monsanto Halts Launch of Chemical After Users Complain of Rashes. This would suggest the company is a little twitchy at present. A quote from the piece by Tom Polansk on the 2nd of November. Quote, Chicago, via Reuters. Monsanto Co. put on hold the launch of a chemical designed to be applied to crop seeds on Wednesday following reports it causes rashes on people. In the latest instance of complaints about a company product that was approved by the US environmental regulators, end quote. Note the word, in the latest instance of complaints about a company product that was approved by US environmental regulators. Approval by US environmental regulators would, to a reasonable person, I suggest, imply a separation between the chemical producer and the regulator. This may be, indeed I would argue, is one of the major problems with the US agricultural environmental regulatory system. Executives from Monsanto regularly appear in positions of power within the FDA and the EPA. This has meant in the past an ignoring of such rash complaints as have halted this rollout of the new wonder chemical from Monsanto. On this occasion, NEMA strike is the poison in question. The company reaction, though, is straight out of the PR handbook. Blame the users and provide self-funded evidence of the safety of the product. Quote, some users who suffered problems may not have followed instructions to wear protective equipment such as gloves, company spokesman Christy Dixon said, end quote. Those of us who lived through the 70s, 80s and 90s will recognise this defence attack as part of the tobacco company's methods. But, and this is a huge but, the Monsanto company has actually halted the rollout of NEMA strike. Could this be the first crack in the facade? Could we be seeing the turning of the tide? I and many others across this one and only planet we call home hope so. In other good news this week, we have a post from the blog Anti-Nuclear entitled, South Australia's Whyalla to become a booming renewable energy hub. Quote, Whyalla Steel City goes green with 1 gigawatt of solar and storage. UK billionaire Sanjeev Gupta has made good on his commitment to transform his newly acquired Australian steel business into a renewable energy powerhouse, announcing massive investments in solar and storage that will knock 40% off his electricity costs, end quote. Let me tell you of this Whyalla. Back in 1983, I landed at the airfield there with the rest of a composite group from our regiment and another to conduct artillery fire and movement exercises across the stunningly beautiful country on the extreme eastern edge of what becomes the Nullarbor Plain. Way back then, Whyalla could best be described as Mordor light. The dryness of the country, the steel mills, the power plants, all added to this feeling. Whyalla is now transforming, and it's not just Whyalla. The company that owns the steel mill there also runs units across this wide brown land. Their plan, and it appears to be being put into action, is to run all their facilities with 100% renewable energy. If Germany can produce enormous amounts of solar power, then surely Australia can do better. Vast areas of land with less than 200 millimetres of rain per year on average. The deeper the drought, the more days of sunshine to produce energy. It's strange our federal government is so enamoured of coal, but that's a podcast for another day. Whyalla is a success story, in danger of joining the Rust Belt, facing extinction through the Paris Agreement and the Commonwealth's coal addiction. It has taken billionaire Sanjeev Gupta to avoid the politics and just build, and continue to build and extend the infrastructure needed. Oh, for a political class with vision rather than vested ideas. And we're going to need more of such changes if we are to avoid the unpleasant consequences of climate change. The blog, Ted Summerfield, aka Punzu Puzzles, brings us a post entitled 3 degrees C of warming will leave world cities below sea level. We all learned in geography classes that cities are usually sited near the coast to avail themselves of access to shipping and trade. This has costs, obviously. Hurricane Sandy in the US springs to mind. But the benefits have, so far, outstripped the costs. A sea level rise associated with 3 degrees of temperature rise would wipe out all coastal cities around the world. Quote, data from the Climate Central group of scientists, analysed by Guardian journalists, shows that 3% of global warming, 3 degrees Celsius of global warming, would ultimately lock in irreversible sea level rises of perhaps 2 metres. Cities from Shanghai to Alexandria and Rio to Osaka are among the worst affected. Miami would be inundated, as would the entire bottom third of the US state of Florida. End quote. Yet there is hope. From the blog, Clean Energy Diary, comes a post, turn your carbon emission into fuel. Quote, it is now possible to convert your CO2 emissions from gas-fired power plants into synthetic fuels, thanks to cheap solar energy. Once you convert into synthetic fuel, then you can recycle it so that your industries can power for good. It is a great way of storing solar energy into a readily deployable fuel source. By generating heat and power from the synthetic fuel, the industries can reap enormous economic benefits while achieving zero carbon emission. It is a win situation for people, environment, and the governments around the world. End quote. Indeed, this is a win situation. From our Whyalla post above, I would be looking for a private individual rather than any elected government to implement this, but you never know. You just never know. And with that, I'll finish up for this week. A transcript of this episode is available at www.worldorganicnews.com/61597/89. There's a link in the show notes. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back at the same time next week.